course, you cannot take Christ out of Christianity and use Christianity as a form or a code for building society. Christianity doesn't work that way. And so we're actually going to begin with Joe Rogan and Adam Curry, kind of picking up the conversation from where we have been in this last political cycle and where we're moving in the future. And then I'm going to bring in some conversation around the ARC conference that was just in London through Christian Baxter and Paul VanderKlay. And then we'll kind of wrap up with some Martin Shaw encouraging us to really refine the person of Christ at the center of Christianity. So thank you for being with me. Let's get into it.
You basically had a Joe Rogan on the left, but you were so crazy that Joe started to think right.
They didn't want me. That was the thing. Like,
they didn't want you?
But that's all the psyop working against them. Because in the past, they could take someone like me and demonize them, and it would be effective. And they could just remove you from the airwaves and then remove you as a problem because you're not playing by the rules. But now people go, oh, you know what? I think he's the one who's actually telling the truth. Let's stop listening to them. And so then CNN crashes, and then faith in mainstream media crashes, and faith in podcasts rises.
I think what we'll see, though, is, and it may come from YouTube, we'll probably see them try to hype someone up to become the Joe Rogan of the left.
Oh, they're already definitely doing that.
Who do you think it is?
I don't care. Let them try.
All right.
But the thing is, it's not going to work unless that person's authentic. Because
without authenticity, it doesn't
if you
work.
hear a person long enough, you know what they're really saying. You know whether or not.
That's right.
You know, I'm wrong all the time. You might not agree with me. That's all great, but I'm not going to lie. And that's the difference.
Yeah.
And a lot of these people are just propagandists. And they're also trying to make an argument for something without looking at the other side, which instantaneously I know now you're propagandizing. Now you're not. Now you're bullshitting me. I always try to look at the other side of everything.
I know you do.
As a human, I think it's an important quality. As a person who's like broadcasting to millions of people, it's a very important quality. But it's an important quality for human beings. Like, know why you think about something. Like, no, is this just a knee-jerk reaction? Or is this well thought out? Are you being objective, or are you captured by this ideology that you're a part of to the point where you're just ignoring? This is the thing that I find fascinating about all this USAID stuff. Because there's so many people that are so against Donald Trump dismantling the organization that they're not looking at the craziness of all the propaganda that's being exposed. They somehow or another are gaslighting themselves and all their followers to say that, no, this is aid. People are going to starve to death. There's food that's rotting. But meanwhile, I'm pretty sure even when they passed this thing where they were trying to put a stop on USAID, they gave exemptions for food and medicine.
Yeah,
so
so
you're hearing these stories of like food that's rotting now and people are going to go starve and everyone's dying of AIDS.
And I think our president is very smart. He's showing us things that enables people like Mike Benz and you and I to have these conversations about, because it's not ideological that USAID, which is not USAID, this is like one of these psyops right up top, like you have Federal Express is not owned by the government, Federal Reserve is not owned by the government, USAID is the Agency for International Development, not aid. And we see on television, there goes another pallet onto the C-130. Aid, U.S. aid from the American people.
Oh, we're being nice.
Yeah, we're being nice to people.
We should be nice. We're the nice people of the world.
So right there, you hear Joe Rogan and Adam Curry kind of diagnosing the situation, and those are two great people to diagnose it. Adam Curry invented podcasting. Joe Rogan is the biggest podcast to have existed. So their sensitivity to this present moment is heightened by what they have been doing. And so what they're saying is, we're moving out of a world where you can just be broadcast to, and we're moving into a world where there is more conversation. And because of that, there seems to be, it's harder to deceive people. That's what it seems. I don't know how true that is, but I'm hopeful. I'm optimistic that is becoming more and more true as we have more and more good faith conversation. And Joe Rogan even pointed this out. You're not going to have a quote unquote Joe Rogan on the left because you have to be authentic. And if you're trying to gaslight people, if you're trying to deceive, or if you're trying to hide your message behind this idea of USAID, right? It's not gonna work. And a little side note, a little side quest here on the USAID. It's so that hideous strength that it's just phenomenal. We're the nice people of the world. They're even using the word nice, which is what C.S. Lewis used for the NICE and that hideous strength. I I did another tweet on this one. But so again, if you don't follow me on the platform formerly known as X, sorry, but Jacques Ellul, in his work, The Humiliation of the Word, which is something that I have been very interested in, laments the decline of true dialogue. Ellul sees modern communication as more about broadcasting messages than engaging in meaningful exchanges. We'll get to this with Paul VanderKlay, Christian Baxter, the ARC conference. Meaningful exchanges. This has led to a society where individuals are more spectators than participants in a conversation, diminishing the human capacity for deep communication and deep understanding. I think that we are made for this, which is why we gravitate towards conversation and dialogue. We want to be heard. We want to hear interesting things, but this is the shift. Modern communication is more about broadcasting messages. That leaves people susceptible to deception. You just hear the message. Grim Grizz, talks about the campfire circuitry. The elders are speaking, and you just need to listen, okay? You're being broadcast to. You're not really being invited into a conversation. Once you break that fourth wall, and once you are invited in that conversation, ARC conference, Jordan Peterson, we're looking at you, then we become resilient against deception. We become a more resilient people. And Jacques Ellul portrays the written word as lacking a living, embodied essence of speech. He sees this as part of a broader cultural and spiritual decline where the word, which was once a vehicle for divine human connection, has been hollowed out. This is Rick Strassman, and it is also Walter Brueggemann's book, The Prophetic Imagination. There's a natural habitat for prophetic voices, connecting divine and human connection. And God created us this way to receive messages, to participate with those messages, to share, right? That's Adam and Eve. Adam is supposed to share the message to Eve, and he fails in his duty. And so we're trying to recapture that. So back to Joe and Adam Curry as we begin to think, where do we go from here? If we're sort of moving out of a broadcasting, propaganda-rich environment and moving into a conversation, dialogue-rich environment, where are we becoming, is there a surprising rebirth in belief in God? Is there a surprising reconnection going on to the Logos, the divine word? Is there something to that? And so I want to point out where Adam Curry goes in this conversation as he begins to talk about the original sort of foundational code that America was built on, and then how we move forward from here.
This is done by a group called the Wall Builders. And David Barton, he has these are the receipts. So it's a Bible, but it has 3/4 of that book is writings by our early presidents, all the way up through Reagan, and it shows you what our code was in the early days up until the 60s, and that's when we got this big argument about we can't have the First Amendment is the right to establish a religion. And that has been perverted throughout the years to say, you can't have, the Bible in schools, and the government can't tell you to do this, and you can't be talking about. The Hall of Congress used to be a church. I mean, that's how we started. And you don't have to necessarily be a believer or saved by Jesus just to understand where we came from and the basic tenets of law, where those guys created it from. The receipts are in the Declaration of Independence. Our Bill of Rights, our amendments, are rights, not that the government gives us. They all say the government shall not infringe, the government may not do this. It's what the government could not do because we had rights given to us by our Creator. And I think if we got back to a little bit of that in America, we might get a bit more on path, which is why certainly all the Jesus freaks are like, President Trump is talking about God. He says God saved him to save America. I mean, a president is a big deal when he does stuff like that. And you can see, just look at the people around us, Russel Brand, Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens. I mean, there's a lot of people who are now starting to see this, because when you see where it comes from, a lot of things start to be clear. And that sculpture, that was like, I had no idea it was there. I'd never heard of it. It's not in any books. but it's kind of a template for where we came from. And I think it's kind of important that we look at that as well as, all the other things that we're looking at now with AI and social media. And we can't just be sitting around for 4 years going, yeah, Trump, yeah, Elon, stomp the libs. We've got to find some spirituality one way or the other. It doesn't have to be God. I would like it to be, but people got to find that.
You're saying some wise things. I think that people need some sort of a moral and ethical structure to live their life through. Jordan Peterson always has this thing, like
Another one,
whether
yeah.
or not, if you believe in God, if you live like you believe in God, you will live a better life. And that is true.
So I find it interesting that, Adam's encouragement here, I really like Adam Curry. And in fact, it was Joe and Adam's conversation 2 years ago that really got this podcast off the ground. And he's appealing to a broad audience there when he says, you don't have to be a believer. You don't have to be a Jesus believer to really understand these things. And I think I get what he's saying. But there's another side to that conversation that is very much, actually, you can't. If you don't know Jesus, like if you have not come into contact with the person of Christ, it's not just a set of principles that he's teaching. He is drawing humanity into himself. And so when we defang Christianity, Martin Shaw will talk about this, when we try to remove the person of Christ and then just say, well, these principles are good enough, the principles then work in on themselves and they prove to be not good enough. In the hands of fallen humanity, we are just going to, like I said at the beginning with Francis Schaeffer, we're just going to recreate a sort of pseudo-Christian, optimistic, secular humanism. I've just tried to throw as many words into that as I possibly could, but it's a pretend Christian ideal. How can we be optimistic if we're secular humanists? How can we be optimistic about where humanity is going? And actually, there's a clip that Christian Baxter got from Peter Thiel that I just is going to hopefully connect this whole train of thought. But essentially, it is a type of humanism. It's a type of trans-humanism that says you can become God. You don't need this man Jesus, because we, with these principles in hand, we can be the God, right? I'm Peter Pan now. Why? Because I have Peter Pan's sword. That's what makes me Peter Pan. I'm the Pan now. Does that really make you Peter Pan, just taking Peter Pan's sword? Do you know how to use that sword, Rufio? And so, yeah, we cannot wield Christianity without Christ. He is the only one fierce enough to do such a thing. And yet we have this other part of the story where a lot of people are optimistic about Donald Trump and Elon Musk, and I'm hopeful, though I'm not optimistic. If they just used Christian language, or if they just try to do Christian principles, is it really going to work? Now, I've got a clip from Timcast IRL. This is kind of a funny aside note, but something to just pay attention to is the fact that Elon wants to colonize another planet, is the fact that he's having multiple children with multiple women, is the fact that he is a bit of a trans-humanist. And what does that sound like to you? Well, to me, it sounds like Joseph Smith. I'll just leave it on the table there. We'll listen to the folks from Timcast, and you can tell me if I'm crazy.
I mean, I don't know if he wants to have an army of mini Musks, but
I do.
Really, you think so?
Yeah.
I
Just like Jeffrey Epstein. He also was farming out. He wanted to create a whole army of little Epsteins.
Yeah, he was that was part of. Yeah, Epstein was all about.
It was weird.
Yeah, it's
they're both transhumanists.
Elon, however, to a certain degree, he does talk about we got to repopulate and all that
100%.
stuff. I do not believe that is his principal motivation. Sometimes rich, powerful men just want to women. It's really that simple.
What if in the contract is to bring him to Mars? They're for his breakaway civilization.
I think it's
Elon. His whole plan is not to help humanity. It's literally he and a bunch of concubines are going to go to Mars.
Yes.
You know what I have learned, Elon? The people are smart. They get it.
Yeah, they do, actually.
They get it. They really see what's happening.
Yes.
Now, okay, so again, this is sort of a funny aside, but it was really interesting to hear that joked about, hear that laughed about, and then kind of go, is there a little bit of a grain of truth there, that this is essentially the lie that was sold to Joseph Smith, that you could, again, it's this religious idea of humanism, of trans-humanism. You can become God. When you die, you'll get your own planet, and your wives will populate the planet with spirit children. Is this strangely another form of that? Sort of the Joseph Smith, Elon Musk story arc is not one that I had on my bingo card, but it is this theme of transhumanism, the transhumanist idea. And so when it comes to Jordan Peterson and the ARC conference, I was already kind of thinking through this sort of transhumanism with Christian language, which essentially is what the LDS Church offers you. And again, I'm not a member of the LDS Church. So I speak out of turn there a little bit, but I can tell you what their missionaries have told me. So there is that. Now, I want to catch up with Paul VanderKlay and Christian Baxter as they were at the Jordan Peterson ARC conference. And I have said this before, that essentially Jordan Peterson is taking the approach of sort of Christian utilitarianism, that he doesn't really want the Jesus of Christianity, but he believes that as a structure, what we see is that it endures through time. Christianity endures the pressure of time and civilization. This is another one of Schaeffer's points, that Rome fell and the Christian church rose because it can endure. Its structure is one of the ways that it endures, but it's the person of Jesus that really is the reason. It's the Spirit that creates the church. And so anyway, that's a little bit of an aside, but it's, again, Jordan Peterson is sort of saying, let's grab the Christian code and then let's just use that to build off of. And you can't do that without Christ at the center. Christ is the only one who can build unity in the midst of diversity in a community that we call the church, the bride of Christ. And so listen to Paul. We'll pick up the theme of we'll pick up the theme of transhumanism again with Peter Thiel, and then we'll move on from there.
So we sit outside with our nose pressed against the glass at the smorgasbord of networking, and it's like, you're doing everything possible to not allow us to do the one thing that this could uniquely do better than anything else. Please stop. Turn off the noise. Give us a quiet space. Give us chairs to sit in. Have at least some degree of facilitation. And none of it would be perfect, which is why, as I said to Andy Wilkins, who works in healthcare, which I said, why? Doctors don't heal the body. They create the arena whereby the body can heal. ARC needs to have big speeches, but they need to do better at that. ARC needs to have big speeches and a big platform, and to bring in the lights, the stars, to attract the people. My conversation with Malcolm Collins. So I'm standing there, me and Rafe Kelly have left the din of the supposed reception where we're networking. Rafe Kelly was also furious, and he was furious. He's like, look at this environment, look at the lighting. This is totally unhuman. So me and Rafe Kelly were just, we're ramping up with respect to this, and CBAX is right there. So we move out of there into a quieter, also less humane environment to do our mutual complaining. And Malcolm comes out of the room. And of course, you can't miss Malcolm, the glasses. And we saw each other, and come on over here. Malcolm's critique was, Rafe has his critique, and then Rafe and Malcolm weren't exactly on the same page with respect to their critique. And I didn't have to say anything about it because I am not a political animal in the way that these guys are, because they know all the different tribes and all of that stuff. And Malcolm's critique was devastating. He said, you have the safer and often lesser lights on stage. And this is, and actually Malcolm disagreed with Rafe, but I think Rafe's critique was actually true, because Rafe said, this is covering up the fissures in this new right-wing consensus that toppled the cathedral. And Malcolm basically pointed out that you've got some serious lights in this room with respect to that counterculture movement who are not on stage, and they're not on stage because they're politically difficult.
Civilization is social and future-oriented, and that means, since it's social, that the individuals who come together to constitute society have to sacrifice their narrow, pleasure-seeking individuality, demanding gratification in the moment, for the sake of their mutual reciprocal relationships with others, locally first, in marriage, in family, in town, in city, expanding to province and state and country, nested all under the auspices, let's say, of the divine. That's a sacrificial process. It means foregoing the narrowly immediate for the sake of the community. It means equally a sacrificial process in relationship to time. The distinguishing characteristic of maturity as opposed to immaturity, and wisdom as opposed to folly, is the ability to sacrifice the immediate demands of the present for the future.
I think there is probably a Christian response to this, where our value in Christian, in a sort of, let's say, a classical Christian worldview, doesn't have to do with language speaking ability or your IQ. If your IQ is less than 130, you're not really human or something like this. It is somehow, it's somehow that you're made in the image of God. There's a way that you have a kind of relationship with God, with the transcendent, with Jesus Christ, and that's sort of the way humanity gets defined. And so I think there were sort of a lot of classical humanist ways to define human beings. I think those have gotten exploded. I think in a way the more Christian ones are the only ones are ones that are still left standing.
So the Peter Thiel big brother head behind Jordan Peterson is just simply the image that's going to stick with me from Christian Baxter's reporting on the Ark. I will leave a link to Christian's channel, to the videos that he did. Hopefully, Christian, you put it into a playlist. If not, I'll link Christian's videos and also Paul's thinking here. You hear it in, if the audio came through, and I hope it did, Peter Thiel, saying that the Christian foundations are the ones that have endured, right? So that, again, and are you hopeful that this is Peter Thiel, the billionaire humanist, who is, really championing some sort of true version of Christianity? Or is it, again, sort of a Joseph Smith type of, it sounds very Christian, but what is it really? What do you mean by Jesus? What do you mean by Christian? What do you mean by salvation? These types of things. And so I'm becoming sensitive to this theme of a Christianity without Christ. And Jordan Peterson even said that in his video, again, from Christian Baxter, where, civilization is social. We're social creatures. We're meant to build community, but what is the thing that holds the community together? He's saying it's self-sacrifice. Well, is it just the idea of self-sacrifice, or is it the demonstration of self-sacrifice that we have in the actual person, Jesus? That is the only reason I too can live a life of unconditional love. Outside of the person of Jesus, outside of the work of the Holy Spirit, I am selfish. I am a selfish animal. I'm not going to build my life around the concept of sacrifice like Jordan Peterson is saying if I don't come into contact with the person who embodies that self-sacrifice. And so I wrote this kind of thinking about this. It's a little inspired by Paul VanderKlay. It's free of charge. You can just have this. It's value added at this point. There is a message that's preserved inside people, a cultural identity, a story. In our modern world, that story is being influenced by media and propaganda. And there is a new arms race between the collective we, the people, and the AI-wielding superhumans. And so we have Paul, and he's encouraging us to build these communities. How do you truly build these communities, these estuaries? I wanted to catch Paul with his arms in the air. How do we build sort of genuine community at scale? That is the question, I think, in front of us. We are sort of this global culture now, and our need hasn't really changed. We still desperately need Jesus as individuals and as communities. And it doesn't matter how big that community gets. Rome certainly thought Rome was powerful and big at the time, and then it fell. Then we have someone like Martin Shaw, and a storyteller comes into the scene, and you realize that it is the nature of prophetic narrative to expand to the size of the globe and also contract to the size of the individual. So Christ is the only one strong enough to unite the community at scale, the individual diversity of the community, and the narrative is the only thing that appeals to everyone and you personally at the same time. There's something to this. As we expand, we also contract. Stories do this. Stories have a way of you can zoom in on a story, you can expand it, or you can contract it. As we build communities bigger and bigger and bigger, it becomes hollow at the center. We need a tool that never loses its potency, no matter how big it gets. And I don't think it's a mistake that God has revealed himself in a prophetic narrative, but he's also the embodiment of the word. That's, I think, where we go from here. We become, this whole question of civilization is for naught if we can't become little Christ, Christians. Now, I'm not trying to say, mass conversion or whatever, but I think ultimately, again, Jesus is drawing people to himself. Everyone will come into contact with Jesus at some point, and then the question is, do you accept him or do you reject him? But Martin Shaw, I thought, had just a wonderful critique of our modern world's relationship to the person and story of Jesus Christ.
We are dealing with someone that was born a fugitive, dies an outlaw, confuses, confounds, and often hurts in some deep spiritual awakening form of way almost everybody that he met. He affected everybody that he met. And then he has the audacity of coming back. What kind of devilment got into the petri dish of Western consciousness that we managed to domesticate someone like that? How did we pull the stinger out of someone like that? A wild Christ indeed.
And so what do we do with a person like Martin Shaw, who comes into this world as a storyteller, a bones of the earth kind of person? He's sort of like Tom Bombadil, from Lord of the Rings. You're not quite sure what to do with the man, and yet there he is, calling us back to the potency of the person of Christ. C.S. Lewis said, Aslan is not a tame lion, and we have this conservative, it's a conservative secular humanism cloaked in Christian language that really has no bite to it ultimately. Jesus is the one who brings the power, and so I wonder if we are refinding our footing as a oral culture, conversation, dialogue, storytelling around the campfire, and yet in some way at a more global scale. Like I said, Jesus is going to draw everyone to himself eventually. And then the question is, what do you do when you come face to face with Jesus? And so I wonder if recapturing that story in some ways, maybe in a very potent way, brings us back to the true Christ. I said this a little while ago, but the sad thing of the Jefferson Bible is that it's a Bible with no miracles. But the sad thing about how modern people read the Bible is that it's a Bible without poetry. So I wonder if we will recapture some of that poetry, that stretchiness of the message that will allow it to envelop these bigger communities. So thank you for being with me in this one, and I'll catch you next time.